In the carnivore space, we talk a lot about seed oils, how bad seed oils are. That's not really something that is in dispute among people in the carnivore, low carb, zero carb space, unless you really are a fan of dirty keto or dirty carnivore. You generally are trying to avoid seed oils. In fact, there's a remarkable kind of awakening going on in the broader culture about this. You see on social media a lot of people, normal people who do not share our belief that we should avoid carbohydrates, generally agreeing with us that seed oils are something we should avoid. It's honestly one of the more remarkable nutritional awakenings I've ever seen. And the interesting thing about it is that, honestly, in the carnivore space, I think we kind of oversimplify this. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Here's our basic thesis. At least it's sort of an implicit thesis. People may not say this explicitly, but it goes something like this. You could practically track the introduction and expansion of the use of seed oils in the American food system and the broader food system to the rising rates of obesity among the population. There are various charts out there that look something like this one that I have on my screen. You'll see the big name doctors using this. And I'm not saying that seed oils aren't a main driving factor for obesity. I think we're oversimplifying the argument because the rise of obesity in America and the West, at least in America, we'll just stick to the United States here, tracks almost perfectly to a few other things. There were a few other things going on at this time. And I have a recommendation for you. If you have the streaming service Hulu, there's a series on there called I think it's called The Food That Made America. Skip the first season. It's like 2 episodes long or something, and it's too broad of an overview. Once you get to the second season, they start focusing on essentially like in the sort of battle royale format of, this food pioneer introduced this one thing and he had to go toe to toe with this other person. And then one example he uses is the founder of how Frito-Lay, how that came about, how these two chip manufacturers battled against each other. And if you watch that series, you start to notice something. That at the time that American obesity that on those charts that you see started to increase, was also just happened to be when those companies were founded and starting to explode in popularity. Okay, so if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, you had, Hershey's candy was available across the United States. You had Reese's peanut butter cups suddenly showing up across the United States, becoming the #1 candy in America. After that, you had the soda wars, as they called them, starting with soft drink manufacturers putting their products all over the place. You had the first wave of fast food starting, which started well before McDonald's in the 1950s, and that was with White Castle, of all things. If you ever had White Castle, it's kind of nasty, but the people, it started here in the Midwest where I'm at, like one state north of me, that White Castle got started in the early 20th century, and it exploded in popularity once the sort of management system was figured out. And so on and so on and so on. And you see these are a cascading effect of different things. And a lot of this was before the use of seed oils were wide. I mean, we think of seed oils and fast food as almost being synonymous, as the one place where you have to be more careful about coming in contact with seed oils if you're still eating otherwise most of the same things people are eating, because French fries are cooked in seed oils. Well, they're kind of a vehicle for seed oils, but by itself, seed oils are really probably not the driver here. It's more like what we saw at the time that you saw those steep growths happening, explosions in the food industry that were ridiculous. By the 1970s, it was something like 80% of Americans were hitting the drive-through, going to Wendy's or McDonald's or something 2 to 3 times a week. That has to be a massive driving factor for obesity. Now, seed oils were a cheap alternative. And one of the things to, tallow, famously, McDonald's sometime in the 1980s or 1990s, succumbing to pressure from people telling you that saturated fats were bad, removed their beef tallow from their fryers, making it so all of a sudden their French fries, one, didn't taste quite as good as they used to. The two were quote unquote healthier. That's a disaster, of course. The fat and carbohydrate combination is well known in our space as being like deadly combination, activates the Randle cycle, all the rest of it. It was this industrialization of the food system that really, really was the main driving factor. Because in addition to like fast food and candy, you also had convenience foods. You had frozen meals showing up in the 1950s, while still most people who worked had labor-intensive jobs. But these foods were hyper-palatable and also were calorically dense. Dense in the wrong kinds of fats, dense in usually the quote-unquote wrong kinds of carbohydrates. This problem of obesity and its growth in America is, if you really put it into a historical context, you see that it's not by itself that seed oils were really the problem. Yes, they are a horrifying thing that if we got rid of out of the food system, if they were banned, we would probably come a long way to reducing obesity by itself. But they're just one factor. And the real culprit here is the building of a food system that made essentially artificial sugars. And I don't mean aspartame and things like that. I mean high fructose corn syrup combined with those seed oils more readily available to people in a form that they could eat large amounts of food, more so than they normally might, for relatively cheap in a small packaging. If you put a McDonald's, I don't know, Big Mac and medium fry and a soft drink in front of you, it doesn't look like that much food. But it's extremely energy dense. It's extremely high in all the wrong fats, and it's extremely high in carbohydrates, including sugars. And when you start really breaking it down, the equivalent amount of food, just in the what limited ways we have of measuring energy, if you were to compare it side by side with a like amount of food that you made yourself or came from whole ingredients, you would probably get more out of it, especially if you used alternative methods of cooking them. It's especially if you use like alternative methods available to people to do it at their own homes. This industrialized, highly processed, because again, McDonald's and these places are serving you processed foods. This industrialized, highly processed food system that was built and has since been replicated all across the Western world, which is now all dealing with its own raising levels of obesity, is the main culprit. It's got a multifactorial system of what caused this increase in obesity. So I think, seed oils, yes, we should stay focused on elimination of seed oils, but ask yourself this question: how much do you rely yourself on that food system? There's plenty of quote-unquote carnivore foods that people get from these fast food places. And I sometimes wonder, has anybody examined the effect of eating the less processed cheese with your meat versus the American singles? There's a whole episode of that show, by the way, on packaged cheese. If you ever want to see how American cheese was invented and how it came to the store shelf, it actually is a fascinating story. But has anybody ever examined in our space, if someone were to remove from their diet the more processed cheeses and just eat the less processed with their meat, not eliminating cheese together, what would the effect be? And I have to ask this because you may have noticed that a lot of carnivores eat a lot of hamburger patties with cheese from fast food restaurants. They're clearly exposing themselves to seed oils when they do this. Most of the time, the cheese you get from those places is American singles, which are not the cleanest cheese ever. Even if they offer, cheddar and Swiss, they're still like American cheese versions of those. They're not the same thing as if you bought a block of, medium high quality or better Swiss cheese from the store and sliced it up. They're not the same thing. Those cheeses often have seed oils added to them to make them more melty, combined with the fact that some of those fast food places do in fact put seed oils on their fryer. That people say, well, they don't, they do their hamburger patty, McDonald's does their hamburger patties just by themselves on the griddle. Sure, there's other things that might go on that griddle that have seed oils in them. We need to really examine this more, I think. We need to really wrap our head around the exposure of that we give ourselves to these things because we focus so much on seed oils without really looking at the broader food system. And another example of this, how many of you still drink diet sodas? Years ago, I mean, I've been dieting off and on my whole life. Obesity is something I've dealt with since I was a kid. And the easiest thing I ever found, weirdly, a lot of people hate diet soda. I found the easiest thing for me was to eliminate regular soft drinks and then replace them with diet sodas. For most of my life, having a regular soft drink is a once or twice a year thing at best. It was otherwise I would have Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi or Coke Zero or whatnot. How many of you still drink those things? The effect that has on your insulin is fascinating, to say the least. The effect it has on your microbiome, gut health, is fascinating, to say the least. And it might blunt the edge of sugar cravings when you're trying to eliminate sugar from your diet, but at the end of the day, it may also make you prone to falling down harder on and eating things you shouldn't be eating. How many of you drink those things? And the reason I ask is because there's a lot of people now asking, why isn't my carnivore diet successful? And the reason might be that you are still attached to this industrial food system, that you're not essentially down to the, beef, butter, bacon, eggs, salt, maybe a little spices here and there if you want to go there, but otherwise that version of the carnivore diet, the more strict version. And it's because people, you see this all the time. I love my mayonnaise, people say. Mayonnaise, unless you buy some really nice stuff made of avocado oil, and avocado oil has its own whole host of problems, but unless you're buying a nicer quality one, you're getting industrial engine grease whipped with eggs and tons of preservatives and tons of flavor additives. That's what you're getting. And people in our space seem to not really get that. And so while most of us talk a good game about seed oils, the real fact of the matter is that seed oils are one big part of a multifactorial problem. There are numerous things that go into this problem of what caused the American obesity crisis. And if you actually go back and look at the history, especially late 19th century into the mid 20th century, the development of fast food, development of processed food, frozen food, convenience foods, really all of them under the umbrella of convenience foods, that middle section of the grocery store, plus the drive-through. I think that's where you see things. That is what we really need to take more seriously. And a lot of us rely still as carnivores, even on that middle section of the store, because hidden among there you can find things that work on a carnivore diet, but most people don't read labels. So the next time, you might be scoffing at what I'm saying to some degree. Next time you're going into that middle section of the store to buy your meat sticks or to go buy your canned fish, go read the label. Guarantee you that tuna you're buying, tuna in water, is not just tuna in water. Noticed that several months ago when I was at Costco. Next time you're looking at those meat sticks, look to see what kind of binding ingredients are in there. You might be surprised. I've never, ever seen one that didn't have some kind of that did not have some kind of binding ingredient, except maybe the Chomps brand. And those things you don't see everywhere, and even then you should avoid those things anyway. Let me know if what you think of this in the comments, please. This is a kind of realization I've had recently as I've watched a lot of people struggle to have the success they want on their carnivore diets. And combined with a lot of bad advice out there, I think the seed oil problem is a big part of a bigger problem than we're admitting. So let me know what you thought of this, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. As to sharing this on social media, it helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in.